everybody, to the Man in the Middle show with Kevin and Joe. I am Joe. That is Kevin. And as you guys know, this is a space where we try to sit with the hard questions and deep transitions and these quiet truths of life as a man experiencing midlife. And today is a very, very sacred moment for Kevin and I
Hmm.
because we're joined by a man that uh, his work is the purpose for us starting this show, and it's deeply shaped both of our lives. And that's with Dr. James Hollis. He's a Jungian analyst, a teacher. He's an author of over 19 books, and those are books that speak straight to the soul of the modern man. And we've talked tons about it. His book, The Middle Passage, gave language to something that really could not be named and
Yeah.
pinpointed on, right?
Right.
So today we're going to be talking about what really happens when the life we built starts to shrink and small, and we begin to ask, "Who am I now?" So, Kevin, you want to talk to everyone a little
Yeah.
bit about what
Well,
your
we just
experience with the
just finished.
episode?
Yeah, we just finished the episode, and so you and I think, are still. We both have this kind of feeling of awe
And
because
wonderment, yeah.
the thing about one of the things about him, he's so consistent in how he delivers everything all the time. It's just this, he really. You made a great point, Joe. I was saying, like, I feel like I'm trying my best to be a layman's interpretation of what I understand from his teaching, and you made a great point that he is that to Jung, right? Like, he probably felt like, okay, I can maybe help people process this really, really heady stuff. And he's affable. I wouldn't call him laid back, but he's very human and very real. I've fantasized so many times what it'd be like to have him as a therapist, as a counselor, and I was going to get to visit him, and I think we got kind of a feeling for that today. And we covered a lot of ground, but I opened up by asking him, like, how long do you have to wait for this transition between the first and second adulthood, and are there any road signs that I'm actually headed in the right direction? And
Hey,
what
man,
he
this hallway's rough.
yeah. And so you'll hear how he answered that, and if you're in a similar place, wondering, what do I do and what does it look like, or I think that something he said at the end, Joe, that really struck me was, that taking on this challenge to find new meaning it's not narcissism. And what struck me when he said that is, like, everyone around you is going to swear that it is. They're going to discount this mission you're on to find something bigger as selfish, narcissism, self-absorption, and
Yeah, I loved that.
and it'll really, really crush you if you accept that from people.
Yeah, because you're beginning to change, and people don't like that because it's unfamiliar, you know?
Right.
Yeah, by the way, really great job teeing this up, Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Definitely, and a lot of gratitude for that. And I felt the same as you. Uh, I was like a kid in the candy store. When you've had someone's work transform your life, to be able to connect and have a conversation with someone, and hear from them about their own journey and their work and their teachings, and they share a message of just wisdom and humility and hope and
Yeah.
all of these things that we really need right now in the world we're living in. And so I just felt incredibly privileged, and also I felt in a good place of asking some tougher questions too. It's like, I'm not going to let this moment pass by to where, he's on the tail end of his journey, and
Right.
we don't really ask the things that maybe need to be asked. And so, um, remember, guys, the middle passage of the book is definitely what you should pick up. And Kevin even mentioned it in the interview as well to get the audio because Dr. James Hollis, we call him Jim. He reads it himself, which is very powerful as
Yeah,
well. So it hits differently
it
when you do it
does.
that way. Um, but I would definitely listen to this episode, guys, whether you're rebuilding, you're reawakening, or you're just kind of realizing that success has still left something missing for you.
And if you
Like,
feel like you're going crazy,
yeah, this is definitely
nobody could
one for you.
understand this. This
Yeah.
is, yeah.
So, like that, thank you as always for listening. And don't forget, Kevin's also going to probably pen up an amazing newsletter on
Oh
this
man,
episode. I have no
feeling
doubt.
pressure on it. I'm gonna take a long walk, process
Yeah,
this.
do it, man.
And just
Yeah,
hats off to him at 85 with all he's accomplished, still putting a suit on every day and going to work, and accepting an interview request from guys like us who are just getting their show started, and actually complimenting us on doing it, because you could hear his voice change a little bit when we talked about how men don't talk about this stuff, and it
yes.
really matters to him. And he sees people every day, and he reads those stats every day about what it actually manifests in, which is demise and terror and trauma. So it was really an incredible full circle moment. So please listen, and please, I hope if this is your first introduction to Hollis, that you just go down a similar rabbit hole that Joe and I have, because you'll never be let down by one of his books, or he didn't. There's no him tossing something out for the publisher, right? It's like,
No,
everything he
no.
does is very, very thought out and meaningful. So
Yeah, I touched on that too. And that was one of the biggest draws to his work for me is that he doesn't write books to sell books. He writes books
yeah,
for the transformation of the individual reading the book.
yeah, he called them mobile classrooms.
Mobile classrooms, yeah. So,
Super
well,
cool. All right,
enjoy.
dive in and enjoy. Appreciate you, Joe, and we'll see you in the next one, everybody. Okay, welcome everybody. We are thrilled today to have Dr. James Hollis, who's given us permission to call him Jim. And Jim, your work has been very foundational for our show, and we reference your ideas from the middle passage at least once per episode. It's the critical transition into the second half of life is where we focus. It's certainly where I am in my life. So could you just begin by describing what you mean by the first and second adulthood?
Sure. Um, when we're born, of course, we're guided by our instincts, but we're also tiny, vulnerable, dependent, at the mercy of the circumstances around us. And so our survival depends on listening to the instructions, observing, trying to make sense of life, and adapting as best we can. And we develop an adaptive personality, which is designed to do two things, and they're quite appropriate. One is stay alive, protect yourself, but also get your needs met as best you can given your limited powers. So we follow our instructions or we run from our instructions in childhood, but the psychological purpose of the first half of life, and we're using a term half of life very, very loosely here, is
Right.
develop enough ego strength, a sense of your own capacity to leave your parents, to separate, to go out into the world, to seek employment, seek relationship, maybe become a parent, pursue your dream, and hopefully become, self-supporting and so forth. And then there's a point where, having achieved all of that, you then may come to the question, so what is this life about then in any case? Or maybe you've achieved your goals, but for reasons you can't account for, they're no longer satisfying, or maybe they never were, or they're not working in the way in which you thought they might. So that wonderful marriage hasn't worked out so well, or that career for which you pursued, is boring or is just draining too much from you. It's in moments like that that one begins to raise other kinds of questions. And that leads, psychologically speaking, into the possibilities of asking larger questions. The questions of the first half of life are appropriate and understandable. How do I survive? How do I fit in? How do I get my needs met? How do I become relatively independent and self-sufficient? All important questions. And if those are not addressed, then there's still some business that hangs over from the first half of life. But the second half of life is really about the ego consciousness confronting the great abyss. Why am I here? In service to what, really? Am I just to repeat this until the day I retire or I die?
Right.
What is my life really about? And how do I make sense of these interruptions that are coming from my own psyche? Perhaps one has started self-medication, or perhaps one has troubling dreams, or one's relationships have fallen apart. There are always venues in which these distresses show up. It could also be a depression. That's what launched my second half of life. I had sort of assiduously pursued the goals of the first half of life, and I think achieved them all. But
Yeah.
then I had a depression. And, it was hard to imagine why, because I'd achieved what I wanted to achieve. But there was
Right.
still unfinished business from childhood, and I was still living an adaptive life, though I didn't know it at the time.
Mm.
And so in that second half of life, the question then is, if the first half of life is what does the world want from me? What do my parents want? What does the school teacher want? What does the employer want? What does my partner want? Is how do I meet those with a measure of consistency and integrity? But in the second half of life, the question comes up, what does the soul want of me?
Yeah.
Now, the word soul may not be someone's first choice of words, but I'm using it here just in a generic sense of what is that deepest part of you that constitutes your essence.
Right.
You were probably closer to as a child than you are as an adult. You may be functional in a way the child could not be, and have powers the child did not have. However, there's still this essential question that revolves around meaning. What's the meaning of this journey? Am I simply to play my roles? My roles may be good or not so good, but who am I apart from my roles? Who am I apart from my history? Who am I apart from my assignments? Those are the kind of questions that start coming up for a person, maybe at 3 in the morning, or when you're driving along the highway and suddenly, some other thought or presence is there that you don't know how to account for. It's in those moments that one is challenged, maybe summoned to move from this adaptive life, which again was most likely necessary, to a generative life. What is it that I am to embody in this world? This is not
Yeah.
about ego gratification. It's not
Right.
about achievements in the outer world. Those are the easy things, so to speak. It's like,
Right.
what is worthy of my service? Because
Yeah.
I say, where do I spend my energy? If I'm not giving myself to something worthy of my service, then I'm giving my energies to something that's unworthy. And I should
Yeah.
pay attention to that.
Yeah. It's so challenging to know the difference. I mean, first of all, there's the first wave of like everything you just described. What is this? What else is there? Why am I not gratified? As you said, you were in a depression
Mhm,
and it felt like you'd achieved everything you set out to.
mhm,
Um, in Joe and I's world, uh, there's always a manual. There's always instructions.
mhm.
We work with leaders in fields and people who are constantly putting out courses and guides. And the takeaway for me, Jim, when I experienced the middle passage, which I listened to the audio and I highly recommend that for everybody, because anything Jim reads to me has that extra level of impact. And sort of the rub of it to me was I completely understand this. He's identified everything I'm going through, but how do I guide myself from here to follow the signs? Because the rub of it is, in order to experience a second adulthood, you have to let go of any expectation for what it might look like. when you arrive there, correct? And
Yes.
so I guess my big search in life right now is, what do those signs look like? And is it a feeling? Is there, because logic kind of needs to go out the window. Logic is what got us here into this question of what's next. So what do we look for from there?
Well, those are good questions. To address that, we really have to get very basic here. You used a key word there, feeling. Stop and think. You and I don't create our feelings. Feelings are autonomous qualitative analyses of our life as experienced by the psyche, which is the Greek word for soul, by the way. You can deny your feelings, you can project them onto others, you can blunt and anesthetize them, you can do all kinds of things. You can feel overwhelmed by them, but you don't create them. So
Hmm.
just to give an obvious example, let's say I've prepared for career X or Y, and I find myself not wanting to go to the office or going to wherever that engagement takes me. And my feeling is saying something which I may override because I've got to earn a living, I've got to support my family,
Right.
all reality-based principles. But recognize if you're doing what is right for you, that feeling is there, even if it's difficult and even conflictual. Secondly, energy systems. When we're doing what's right for us, the energy is there for us. It supports us. We get into that flow, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we can mobilize our energy, and we have to get up at 3 in the morning to feed the baby, or to show up at work and carry through on a difficult assignment. That's partly how our systems adapted to survival and productivity. But if you keep doing over time, as we all know, it leads to exhaustion and to burnout and 1,000 different treatment plans along the way. Thirdly, is the meaning function. If what I'm doing is meaningful, truly meaningful, then I can put up with the struggles. I can carry through the hardships. And I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. Also, we have our dreams. As a psychoanalyst, I spend time with people's dreams. In other words, what few of us recognize is there's another cluster of energy inside of each of us that knows us better than we know ourselves. It's running the show, not the ego. The ego thinks it's the boss. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when I say ego, I just mean that conscious part of us at the moment. I'm not talking about egotism or anything like that. The ego is in charge of executing the plans. It's the ego that looks both ways before it crosses the street. That saves your life. That's important. But the problem comes when the ego thinks it's the boss and when it's in charge of everything. And that's why it's setting itself up for invasion by the unconscious. And we also have as a fifth venue, um, psychopathology. When we are off course, our psyche registers disapproval.
Mm.
For me, it came up in a depression. For some people, it's having an affair. Some people, it's oh, I'll change my job. That'll solve the problem. Or I'm going to move to Seattle. It's what I call the Seattle solution, right? If I just get out of here, I can start over there.
Yeah.
And once in a while, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Many times you realize whatever is unaddressed followed you. It's in your suitcase.
Right.
You take those five things, and I said it's very basic, but we have all been conditioned to separate ourselves from those natural sources of insight because there's something in us that's constantly seeking its expression.
Mm.
And when it is ignored or repressed, then it begins to pathologize. And then we have, a crisis of some kind.
Yeah.
A person thinks, I no longer know who I am, or I just don't have the energy to do what I've wanted to before. If I could only do this, you see, it's a time of great, generation of fantasy.
Yeah.
The real question is, what about meeting your own soul on life's pathway? Now, I'll give you an example just to put flesh on these general principles. My early life was as an academic, and it was rich and valuable. I loved it. I'm still involved in teaching. That's why you and I are talking today. But I didn't realize until that depression came that I had used the life of the mind, which was rich and valuable for me as a way of trying to rise above the unprocessed emotions left over from my childhood experiences.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it was an adaptive and protective mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. I was operating in good faith to that point
Mm-hmm.
until the psyche reached up and had to grab hold and pull me down and take me back to some basics. And I would have never guessed. Of course, as a little boy, I thought, well, I'll be a Major League Baseball player or something like that, as every child does, or an airplane pilot, but I love my teachers because they were opening doors for me. Even in grade school, I loved my teachers and I identified with them, and I still do.
Mm.
I'm grateful for them. However, I latched on to that not only as a pathway for me, again, with all of its blessings,
Yeah.
but as an alternative to really dealing with what needed to be dealt with. And so that's why the psyche can't be ignored. We can't fool the gods, so to speak. Sooner or later, they
Yeah.
show up and demand that we pay the butcher's bill.
Yeah.
And that's where the depression came.
And
And let me just add one piece there. I
yeah,
would
please.
have never imagined as a young person that I would train to spend my days and appreciate spending my days listening to people's problems as I do as a therapist. I couldn't have imagined that. And yet today I can't think of anything more honorific than to be invited to share people's journeys, which is what I do every day. And that's a privilege. And it's a humbling experience because I learn I have to face my own issues in that process. None of us is exempt from them.
Yeah.
And it's a richer world and a more authentic world than anything I could have imagined. So in a certain way, that early script was helpful and productive, but it was also a defense, and I didn't know that. And the real question then is, what is it within you that is asking that much effort at defense? You see, and that is a humbling question.
Yeah.
The more we do this work, the more it humbles us
Yeah.
because the ego never knows enough to know enough. That's
Right.
the problem. But it's the boss and it's in charge of making major decisions.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of weight upon it. But, what part of us? I often ask clients in a situation where they have to make a large decision. Now, what is that choice in service to inside of you? See, that's a different kind of question. Not so much what are the outer parameters of this or the consequences of this choice versus that choice, but what is that in service to inside of you? And if you don't know, you better just take some time here to figure that out and beware of, convincing yourself
Right.
that otherwise you're doing it for maybe the right thing for the wrong reason. And in the
Yeah.
long run, it won't work out. And another question I ask of clients at times when you reach a significant juncture in your life, which is the path of psycho-spiritual enlargement, and which one, in a sense, is the path of safety or the path of security or the path of fitting in or something like that. There's nothing reprehensible about those things, but they're really beside the point, are they? They're adaptations, not your real journey.
Yeah. Joe, just one more, and then I want to I know you have some great questions as well. You know what I'm experiencing, Jim, is it feels like for the last year, I've almost been as a third party observant or second party observant to myself, watching myself
Mm-hmm.
slowly burn the ships
Mm-hmm.
of my life. And I want to believe it's for a reason. It's because there's something bigger. I do feel the calling. I know there's something next. And the way I comprehend this second adulthood is that everything I worked hard to achieve skill wise and anything that might resemble wisdom that I've achieved. I've raised children. I've been in a long marriage, will be there with me and for me as I experience what's next or bigger or smaller or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I also kind of need to get going on whatever the next thing is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my trial at the moment. And
Mhm.
and I wonder if in your clients you see something similar, or if there are signs to pay attention to, or maybe stave off as they occur.
Well, you just said, I'd like to get going. That's totally understandable. I remember that. And I remember someone, a friend of mine, quoting Jung, who said once, haste is of the devil. Now,
Mm,
I didn't want to hear that. That was told to me in Zurich when I was over there retraining. I didn't go over there to change my profession. I went over there to explore more deeply what I had begun to see, which there was a rich world within, and I knew very little about it. Um, and each time I worked at that, each year that passed, and I'm talking about years now, it became clear that I was being called in a different direction, away from the ivory tower and into the world of human suffering. And that's not a place I wanted to go.
yeah.
Um, I'll give you a quick example. I had to do an internship and I was working in a state psychiatric hospital. And the first week I was there, I was assigned to a grizzled old ex-military guy who was my mentor. I had to report to him.
Mm,
And he said, come here, Hollis. He said, I've a great patient for you to work with. And I thought, okay, I felt something was weird about that, but he took me and we walked into a room, a rather small room, but there was a crowd of people in there and they were gathered around something. And I looked there and it was like looking at Picasso's Guernica. I had to put the pieces together to realize I was seeing the late stages
mm,
of an autopsy. And this was the guy's joke to the new kid on the block. I found a patient you could work with, right? A
wow.
deceased party.
Wow.
Someone had died, and for legal reasons, they had to find out the cause of the death. And I felt kicked in the stomach, and yet I thought as I reflected on that later, a good part of my life, and this is true for every child to some degree, is you develop reactions, defenses, quite understandably, against that which you find frightening or overwhelming or simply too large to take on. But my own psyche had pulled me back into that world of the hospital. Now, a lot of my early life trauma had come out of hospital experiences, so that was partly tied to that. But I thought, I came here voluntarily. What was I expecting to run into? But it was just one example. And then there was a time when I was going between the campus of the university and the psychiatric hospital in the same day. They were about 20 miles apart. And I began to realize that as much as I found the conversation on the campus rich and valuable, it lacked something. There was something more authentic about what's going on with human beings in the hospital. So slowly my internal gravity began shifting. So
Mm,
I set out to pursue a deeper engagement with my own stuff, but wound up changing careers at midlife. And that was between ages 36 and 42. So
mm,
right on schedule when you look at it. But
yeah.
this passage, and I call it a passage because the roadmap that we had to that point may have been useful and productive or may not have been, but whatever, it's no longer applicable to the territory you find yourself in.
Right.
So you're in that terrible in between. And that in between can take years. That's why I responded to, let's get on with it. Hey, I remember thinking, if I'm not going to do that, let me find the next path. Rather, I had to let this thing develop in another way. And the two hardest things I've ever learned as a therapist, I despise, but they're profoundly true, and I experience it every day, and that's patience and powerlessness. I
Mm,
can tell you the ego is not thrilled with either one of them, but I also know that I have to hang in there for a while, and I can't fix it all. I can't make it happen, but I can attend the process in an honest way, and that does produce change in my life or other people's lives. So.
mm,
Just one other piece here. Jung said once in a letter, this work consists of three parts, of which Psychology can only help with one part of that. And he said that's to give insight. But he said, then come the moral qualities of that individual. Second is courage to face what your life is calling you to face. And thirdly is endurance, sticking it out over time. And that, I think, is succinct as possible. It's like figure something out, but then engage it, move into it rather than run from it, as a lot of our adaptive behaviors serve. And stick it out until you evolve into a different place. And no one wants to hear that. If it's Friday, we want to know by Monday what my
Yeah.
new assignment is. You see.
Right.
It seldom works that way.
Thank you very much. Joe?
Good stuff, Jim. Really, I'm soaking this up. Just like personally, this is big for me. I've been doing Jungian work now almost 5 years. So, discovering your work has been transformative for my life. So, definitely kudos to you for that. One of my favorite things that you've said is that I don't write books to sell books, but I write books for the transformation of the individual. And I always loved that. My question that surfaced, which is a little different than what I initially had wanted to ask, but through this conversation has just kind of come to the surface is we were talking so much about like these worldly things in the first, adulthood and the how much all of that matters, and then the second adulthood is really the calling of the godly side of life. And I'd be interested to hear your take in how much God plays a role in the development, and maybe in your life and in your patient's life, in the transformation process of that dissension inward, to answer that calling.
Hmm. Well, um, it's a very complicated question. I tend not to use the word God simply out of respect. Um, the moment our language tries to trap something like that, it turns it into a noun. And nouns are something you can observe or see or shows up on your MRI. I prefer to think of this as an energy of some kind that is in the same way that wind is energy. You can't see it, but you feel its experiences, you see. I used the word a while ago, psycho-spiritual, because I do believe this is about the life of the spirit. It has to do with what your deepest values are. And I've often said to people, it's not so much what you believe, it's that's in service to inside of you. That makes a difference. Is that something you receive from others and that's just a safe path for you? Is it something that helps you sort of manipulate your world? I mean, if we look underneath, we often have a shadow agenda there. It's about our ego control. But if it calls you to something that you are having to stretch, have to face the things you don't want to face, then you could say there's something authentic about that process. And the life of the spirit is where because we don't just mobilize the spirit, it's something that quickens within it. When we were talking about first and second half of life a while ago, the spirit that we can mobilize by the new and the assumption, if I do the right things, it will take me to the right place. You can mobilize that just for a while, but it's autonomous and it has a life of its own. It's when the spirit disappears that one hits those difficult places in one's life. Or that's another sign of the passage occurring where something has played out and whatever wants to emerge in that person is not yet on the horizon. And you've got that difficult in between. I could give you tons of examples of real life people's experiences, some of whom were at midlife chronologically, some late in life, where they lose a partner, or they're downsized at work, or their children leave, or they're facing aging and mortality. When all of the assumptions that one has that somehow I'm exempt or the things that I'm doing will spare me these things become really dubious. And when that happens, then you realize that person enters the dark night of the soul. So I think to answer your question is I can't answer it. I say that out of respect for the mystery. Jung said once the life is a short pause between two great mysteries. You know, from whence we've come, whither we're going. We don't know. People have opinions, but we don't know. And the older I get, the more I can tolerate that ambiguity. And when I was young, I had to know. You know, I had to know. It's one reason I undertook a lot of study in those areas. But in the end, those are sort of categories of the mind. They don't necessarily touch the soul. And you know, to live with ambiguity is in some way to respect the movement of the spirit because we don't know what is moving through us, but something is. You know, the Greek word pneuma, from which we get pneumonia or pneumatic tubes, which is what tires used to be called. Pneuma is the Greek word for spirit. And it's not something we manufacture. It's something that's quickened or triggered, and it carries us. When the spirit is present, you can go through anything.
Yeah.
See, and as Jung said, the smallest of things with meaning is always greater than the largest of things without meaning. You know, we live in a culture where it's got to be bigger, better, shinier, the latest thing. We live in a world of distraction, is what we live in. And to realize that this is the still small voice of the soul speaking. And that one of the clues, as I mentioned, is the energy for it, not the energy that your ego generates, which is sometimes essential for life, but it's the kind of energy that quickens when you see something, you experience something that reaches in and touches you very deeply, that has a certain resonance for you. Just to give a obvious example, let's say all of us walk into an art museum. Each of us is touched by a particular painting and are unmoved by the others. Which one of us is right? Well, each one of us has a different journey and a different embodiment of the spirit is engaged in a different way by a different painting. And you don't have to explain that. You have to say simply, this somehow resonates for me. And therefore, I want to pay attention to that. And if it doesn't resonate, no matter how well intended things might be, well, it's not right for you.
Yes, I love that. Something that's been surfacing for me is just no longer needing to explain the sacred,
Mhm.
you know. And in this, I love that you said that because one of the things that's been surfacing a lot for me lately is in this season of wholeness that I'm experiencing from a lot of the work that I've done, and I've been talking to Kevin about this is the level of comfort that I've had in uncertainty, which is very new for me because normally I'm grasping and grabbing and it's more so of just I'm a feeling of lacking nothing, so I'm okay. And that just kind of that feeling of okay is very new, of just being usefully whole. And that experience has been a very interesting and again, and very new, right? So it's like, what is this new way of being and what is it like to experience life in this way? But one of the questions that was coming up a lot for men that are doing this work,
Mhm.
Jungian work, is there seems to be a lot of confusion, and you mentioned it when we were just chatting about shadow work. And can you talk to me about shadow work, specifically what is the shadow, and then integrating the shadow so that it's no longer running the show?
Sure. And before I do that, let me just follow up on your previous comment here. Um, I have a chapter in a manuscript I've just finished about why people don't like themselves very much. Most people don't like each other themselves, right? And they assume others don't either too often. But it's because there's often a discrepancy because what we desire in life, when we were able to realize in our lives, is very large gulf there, or we've internalized certain experiences as being statements to us as opposed to just things happening and so forth. But, you know, when you said I can live without having to know at this moment, that's important. If you know that your questions are honest and your efforts are honest, there's something that carries you through that process, something that is authentic for you. It doesn't have to apply to others. It's your journey. So if you know you're doing what's right for you, and this is not about selfishness, it's about serving, as I said, something larger than your ego comforts. Because part of our individuation process, ironically, involves our engagement with others. Otherwise we get caught in the loop of our own complexes, jabbering to each other. But again, that takes us to the shadow issue here. The shadow is not synonymous with evil, though evil can come from the shadow. The shadow is those parts of our personalities or our group affiliations, because nations have shadows, religious organizations and educational and medical and governmental organizations have shadows, etc. Those energies or values that, when brought to consciousness, because they often operate unconsciously, that when brought to consciousness cause us some difficulty because there's discrepancy. There's a gap between what we intend and what in fact is spilling into the world through us. So the shadow represents life's energy. As Jung said, a shadowless person would just be a superficial person, a person of, a kind of emotional chameleon. You take on the values of your environment, which sometimes children have to do to survive, but that carried into one's adult life sooner or later will betray them. So the shadow is, again, the parts of me that I would prefer not to have to address. But on the other hand, how is it that I'm exempt from the human condition? The wisest thing ever said about the shadow came from the Latin playwright Terence, a little over 2 millennia ago, who said, "Nothing human is alien to me." Now, to understand that means, oh, vanity? I'm not a vain person. Well, everyone has moments of vanity, jealousy, anger, suspiciousness, aggression, whatever. Part of life's energies. We're not here to judge them. We're simply to say that comes with your nature. And when you try to split off yourself from your nature, that's when grave harm comes to the individual. That's why Nietzsche called us the sick animal, right? And underneath all of this, these energies continue to work and spill into the world through your unlived life or through your unconscious mechanisms as you relate to people or your troubling dreams, or can even somaticize as an illness. For example, all of us who are parents could say and swear in a court of law, "I'm doing my best as a parent. I think I know what's right for my child. I'm wanting. But in many ways, you see, we have these hidden agendas. We want our children to grow up and be, surprise, surprise, something like us. We want them to replicate our lives, our values, our cultural orientations, maybe our religions, our political attitudes, et cetera, et cetera. And that runs contrary to caring about the soul of that child as a separate entity. That's why Jung said the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. So what I have not faced is part of my shadow inheritance to my children. And they either will get stuck at the same place, which is common, or be spending their life trying to overcome that, get unstuck. So I'm never free of the whole range of human emotions. And the ego is not wise enough to even foresee consequences. I've often engaged people in workshops with some 4 basic questions. And these are so simple, nobody could feel particularly threatened by them. The first is, of the many, many virtues you undoubtedly have, why don't you just pick out 3 and just, write them down here? So let's say if I try to be honest, so you write down honest, that's all I'm asking of you. Write down a virtue that you seek to practice. And then for number two, write down the opposite of that virtue. So let's say, not that you would know anything about this, but if honesty was on the list, you'd put dishonesty. All right, that's the easy part. Question three then. Now, for each of those three virtues that you identified, find some place in your life, maybe many places, where the practice of that virtue, so-called virtue, brought harm to you or to someone around you. And suddenly the whole tenor of this thing changes because you begin to realize sometimes even the virtue sets up consequences that human consciousness couldn't anticipate.
Mm.
And then the fourth question is to look at that number two list of the things that are contrary to your professed intentions and to say, and where have they shown up in your life as a result of your choices, maybe producing consequences that were unforeseen. So, that's a very simple way to begin to look at another, Jung said our biggest shadow is not that we're evil or capable of evil, but it's that we live small lives, psycho-spiritually speaking. He said we all walk in shoes too small for us. Well, we all know what that means intuitively. It's about stepping into the largeness of your summons as a human being to be. This is not in service to the ego. That's the point. Most of the people that we would admire in history are people who suffered greatly, but what we admire is they were able to embody some deep, deep value that was central to their journey. And they may have lived it at some great cost to them, but we admire the fact that their commitment and their courage and their persistence in some way valorized that value and produced for the rest of us some kind of exemplum to be inspired by. So, you know, the the the, the hero archetype, just to take a little sidebar here for a moment, is that part of you that has to get up in the morning. Because as I said in the middle passage, you will remember this probably, that there's always at the foot of the bed the two gremlins, fear and lethargy. Fear says, hey, buddy, it's just too much out there. It's too big you can't handle that. Life's too big for you. And lethargy says, chill out, pull the blanket over your head, turn on the telly, have some chocolate. And tomorrow's another day. And then your life just got spent. It's another day thrown away, you see. So the hero task is to step into your journey and live it as courageously as you can manage, knowing some days you get knocked down, then you get up. Some days you feel it was worthwhile. Other days seems like a regression. Well, so what? Show up again tomorrow. Do the best you can. And when you're doing that, you're operating a good faith with your psyche. It won't beat you up. It's not going to necessarily please the ego, but we're not here to do that. It's to live a more authentic life, whatever that looks like in your life and my life journey and so forth.
Mm.
Love that. Kevin, one of the things that I did want to bring up was that, so this was all birthed, Jim, from conversations that Kevin and I had. We met in an entrepreneur group and we're like, we should have, our souls apparently have met before. Let's have breakfast and talk, right? And it was like, you know how it is when you met somebody like you've known them forever. And after our first meeting, I had suggested the middle passage to him. And then, it was just lightly said, hey, I just want you to know that, what I say, Kevin was like, you're not crazy.
Wanted you to know you're not going crazy.
Yeah, I wanted, and so I think there's, and again, I experience the same thing. And if you could speak directly to men, right, that know they have, that something has to change, but they don't know what or how, what would you say to that?
Well, each person obviously is different, each. And interestingly enough, I've often had to say to someone who came in, you know, you're really not crazy. There is a purpose behind this. There is something here that is trying to deconstruct the false self. Now, that's a scary thing because it's, quote, the false self that's gotten us this far. It's kind of
Yeah.
like rowing your boat to the middle of a pond and then getting out of the boat. Why would you do that? Well, because the boat's sinking regardless. You don't have a choice anymore. So, but you're not crazy. There's a reason for that. I'll give you a quick example. When a book came out some years ago, I don't even remember which one, the publisher arranged 40 radio interviews to
Mm.
promote the book. And some of these were trivial, drive time stuff, where, you know, just fodder for the air. Others were serious interviews where the people had read the book and wanted to ask some questions and so forth. But of those 40, I would say about 30 asked me this question, and this is quite literal. Why did the pop star, Britney Spears, cut her hair in public? What's wrong with that crazy person? It's like, look at the crazy person. We know that we're fine because she's the crazy one, right?
Yeah.
And I said, look, if she came to me in therapy, I would say, look, there's a reason for what happened there. Something in you is rejecting that glass cage that you live in. Because to cut her hair in public was to diminish her persona. And what is a pop star but not a human being anymore, but a floating persona out there? And the very thing that she set out to be, a music star, you see, what a lot of little girls would like to emulate, now was a prison that she was in, emotionally speaking. And ironically, many times it's the success of one's early life that imprisons one because one thinks that's what I have to continue to do or I have to sustain this. And something took over. And I said, you know, I imagine that the people around her, and maybe she herself, will quickly say, oh, but we've got so much at stake here. Look at the millions of dollars we're making and so forth. And we'll reconstitute that as soon as possible. We'll go into a rehab and you'll come out all fixed and we can, you know, put the show on the road. That's exactly what happened.
Mm.
And, you know, I say this with deepest sympathy. I don't imagine, and I don't mean to be personal about her because I don't know her, obviously. That's just one example of the autonomy of the psyche taking over. If you know, there's the old saying, those who don't make these steps, you know, the gods will do it for them, you know, sooner or later. So her psyche took over in the same way that mine did. That's what produced that depression. So you know, it 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 is a time for going back to the drawing board. Now, that doesn't mean that one abandons one's family. It doesn't mean that one doesn't carry out parental relationships, or it doesn't mean that one doesn't continue the job. I continue to stay in academia during this transition because that was my paycheck, and I still loved the teaching. But I also knew something else was being developed at the same time. Many times people have said to me, do you think I should do this or do this? And I usually say yes. There's a way to do both. Both are legitimate. There's a place for commitment, for duty.
Mm.
You know, there's a chapter in the book, Creating a Life, titled, Is There a Duty to Duty? And the answer is yes. But you also have a duty to your own soul. There
Yeah.
are sometimes competing duties, and each has to be honored in its own way. Because if you don't, then it becomes one-sided. And that leads to problems of another kind. So during these times of transition is very difficult to carry on holding the fragments together at times,
Yeah.
while at the same time reaching for something you don't even know is there yet. And it's that faith
Faith.
that
Yeah.
that there's something there that's coming to meet you.
Yeah.
A client who came, who was a woman at 40, and she'd had a dream. It was frightened her. Her last child had sailed off. She'd gotten married young, had children. They all went away and so forth, and as they're supposed to. And she dreamt she was in the hospital. And her favorite relative came in and said to her very sweetly, Joanne, it's time to die. And in the dream, she says, oh, okay. She accepted that. And that was the dream. And she said, is this mean that I have cancer or some terminal condition here? And I said, well, our life is terminal, but not for another few decades, let's hope. I said, this is a classic announcement that you followed your instructions faithfully the first half
Mm.
and fine, but it's over, right? And one of the things she realized is that in being married and a homemaker and a mother and so forth, she had never had the opportunity for her own personal development, education, and so forth. And she went back to school and ultimately wound up being a psychotherapist herself.
Mm.
So it was interesting because she it came to her, and by the way, the agent that announced that was the one person who had been most supportive to her in the conduct of her life. So the psyche, said, let's send a central casting in this person's life and
Yeah.
bring out the one relative who this woman would trust and
Mm.
say, hey, it's okay, it's time to die. Because what's dying is your first half of life instructions.
Mm.
And you're going to learn to tolerate this in-betweenness for a while until a new direction appears for you. And it will sooner or later.
Yeah. I get the sense, Jim, in your work that dream analysis obviously is very critical,
Hmm.
and I'm guessing a little hard to get because people are reluctant to record, maybe because they just want to get back to sleep or whatever. Um, but I can tell you always light up when you talk about someone's dream because it often leads to a breakthrough.
Hmm.
What do we? Joe and I actually challenged each other because of you to record as many dreams as we can.
Hmm. Hmm.
But once somebody collects their dreams and they don't have you to bring it to, what's the best way for them to interpret or make sense?
Yeah.
Of the dreams.
Well, first of all, most people say, I don't dream or I don't remember my dreams. But sleep research tells us on an average sleep cycle, we're talking 6 to 8 hours, we will dream approximately 6 times. Times seven, that's 42 a week. No one remembers that many, but there's a lot of activity going on, and nature does not waste energy. So it's serving a purpose. And I think there are two major purposes. One is simply to try to process and metabolize the magnitude of stimuli that assault us in any given 24 hours. It's just
Mm.
constant input of
Yeah.
information and experience. And unprocessed, that stuff will pathologize in the body, for example. But secondly, if you pay attention over time, you realize there's some intelligence there that using its language, its world of metaphor and symbol, is reacting to how your life is unfolding for you, whether it's through you or what's happening with you. And that if you pay attention, it's the beginning of the shift of authority. See, we have it when we're born, as I said, that's instinct, but we have to trade it away because we're not able to do much in our diapers and toddlers. So this is about getting that authority back, which is a central project of the second half of life. Get your personal authority back. That is to say, from the plethora of stimuli and of competing values, what is really true for you? And now can you find the courage to live that?
Mm.
Now, also just to say one other statistic, I'm 85, and I read recently that if you reach 80, you will have spent 6 years of your life dreaming,
Wow.
not sleeping. That could be up to a third of those 80 years, but 6 years dreaming. Again, pointing to the centrality of dreams as a self-regulating part of our psyche, both healing of splits on the one hand, but also developmental in its agenda on the other hand.
Mm.
So to get back to your question, when you're not working with someone else, and by the way, most therapists are not trained at all in dream work. It's not, most modern psychologists, and they have a place, I'm not denigrating them, are in service to the ego's fantasy of its own sovereignty. If I can learn this or do that or practice this, things will change for me in this productive way. That's partly true as far as it goes. But it also neglects the larger question is what is your journey really about? Not just fitting in or being productive in life. You may be productive in an area that's totally irrelevant to the soul. But it's really an engagement with that other that lies within to recognize sooner or later something in each of us knows us better than we know ourselves.
Mm,
It's not only manufacturing and dying, killing cells as we speak, and digesting your breakfast and doing 1,000 operations, which, the ego has no idea that's even going on. It's a self-regulatory system, but it's also a developmental system.
yeah.
And it has a point of view, which is what we are calling is the perspective of the soul that manifests through your symptomatology, through your body, through the feeling function, through the energy system, but also through the dreams. Now, finally, to get back to your question, to realize the dream is not trying to be obscure, it's trying to use the language of images to reflect something that's going on inside of you. And so often people will just dismiss the dream, say, "Oh, I know what that's about. I saw it on television last night," or something happened
Right.
at work. Well, the psyche doesn't have any obligation to talk about what happened at work yesterday.
Mm,
It will use those images to reflect something else that's really going on for you. And that's important to realize. Don't be confused by literalizing
right.
you see, to say why that image and what is that really suggesting deeper within me. I've often said it, things are not about what they're about. So you have to ask, all right, so then what are they about? Well, they're about something else that runs deeper. The key thing here is to elicit one's associations. Where have I had this kind of feeling before?
Right.
What was that about? Why has it come up now? Why has this dream come to me? Let me choose a silly example. Let's say one's in a corporate setting, and in the dream, you're in a picnic run by the company, let's say, and you do something that you consider later quite embarrassing. You grab someone's cap and stomped on it, and everybody laughed at you. And then you go off in a huff or something like that. It's just an embarrassing dream. It's like, what's that about? Well, what is it about? Why that act? Why that hat? All of these images have some link to an invisible drama. And maybe you realize, right? That's the kind of cap that my employer wears, you see. And you realize it was, about the deeper sense of anger that maybe one is carrying toward that other that shows up in the, as Freud said once, that people, reject my theories by day and dream them at night, you
Mm,
see. So that level of feeling, and sometimes it tells you something that you already know, but then it's saying, but this is underlining it or italicizing it. It's telling you this is more important than you thought at the time. There's more energy connected to that than
yeah.
you see.
Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example. My
Um,
first dream in Zurich, this is such a classic. It's a cliche, but it's wonderful. I was standing on the rampart of a medieval cathedral, not cathedral, a castle, I beg your pardon, a castle. And I was a medieval knight in my armor, and the castle was under siege.
mm,
The air was thick with arrows flying. And there was real anxiety. Is this castle going to hold? And I could see at the edge of this battlefield where a forest began was this witch-like figure who was the person who was leading the oppositional forces. And the dream ended in a sense of anxiety. Will this castle hold? Now, that was my first dream.
mm,
I took it to my analyst in Zurich, and he said, well, we're going to have to lower the drawbridge and go out and talk to her and see why she's so upset with you. I remember at the time thinking, are you crazy? She's trying to kill me, right? But then what better example of midlife? You're hanging on to the castle you've built. You're hanging on to your defenses. They're under assault. And I had to engage in an extended conversation with that figure who through a process called active imagination, where I re-engaged that figure in a waking dream setting. And she led me into the forest. And I remember thinking I was in trouble before, I'm in real trouble now. But she opened this huge book. I mean, it was like 3 feet tall, and in that were hieroglyphics. And she pointed to that. She didn't say a word. And I knew what she was saying was, this is just the beginning of opening a whole new world to you. It's mysterious now, but this is part of the process. It will take you somewhere else. Now, that's a classic dream of midlife,
Yeah.
feeling the false self that is under siege. And the truth is, it has to go. But that was part of the holding the container of that defragmentation of the false
Yeah.
self while one carries on one's daily responsibilities as
Yeah.
well. There were many other dreams I could cite, or the
Right.
dreams I could tell you of other people, but they are not purposelessness. They
Yeah.
they always have a meaning, even if it seems. And again, there are dreams that are processing what's really going on in our daily life and allows us to discharge some emotion. But Jung felt the most important dreams were the ones that were compensatory. So as our life moves in this direction, we leave behind vital parts of our own personalities, and so they begin to come up, sometimes in troubling ways, as is the witch at the edge of the forest
Yeah.
for me. To use Jung's terminology, that was the anima that was very upset with me because I'd lived so
Yeah.
much up here. She was saying, but you need to start coming down here, you see.
Mm.
And
My,
I just add one piece to
yeah.
that. It was the fourth year of my years there that I had one more dream saying the same thing about my life's journey. And it was the proverbial feather that tilted the whole fulcrum here, or pendulum here. And I remember thinking at the time, holy cow, or words to that effect, something just shifted. And this work moved at that moment from a thought of the head, to which I'd been committed and had seen the value of it, to an experience of the heart. And that's
Mm.
becomes very real for you, you see. You can't make that up. You have to pay your dues to get that. And I don't want to sound mystical about it, but it's again recognizing the movement of the spirit through us that is an energy that the ego can mobilize at times, but in the long run is independent. And if we keep mobilizing it in the wrong places, it leads to, excuse me, psychospiritual exhaustion and loss of meaning and purpose, as we all know.
Wow. Well, Dr. Hollis, Jim, want to respect your time and keep to our limit. This has been phenomenal. As always, when we explore your work, it feels like we're only scratching the surface. Fortunately, you've written over 17 books and covered a lot of this. The latest one I'm digging into is Prisms, which is you don't stick to one topic and keep going on it. There's just a world to discover here through Dr. Hollis's work. Highly recommend them all, as we always do. And so I don't know if you have one parting thing you'd like to say. Again, our audience is men often who feel like they don't have anyone to express this to, or don't know how to process the feelings they're having. What would you say to them as a place to start and feel better?
Well, first of all, and I'm not promoting the books, honestly. Those books were written to reach to people. I consider them mobile classrooms, to say you're not crazy. There is a purposefulness that's going on here. And the more you work at that, the more your life will take on a different gravitas. And you're not alone in this. Many people go through this. You just don't know from outside. And that there is a meaning and purpose to the suffering. And you have to figure out what that means for you and what changes it's asking for in your life. Now, I'm not saying therapy is for everyone. It's certainly for some people. And the truth is, not every therapist is prepared to work at a depth level. But if you don't begin to engage the unconscious, it will remain superficial. And the problem with the unconscious is it's unconscious. But as I said, there are ways in which we can begin to gain access to the unconscious and realize again We are not our egos. That's a complex, a cluster of energy that is essential to our survival and adaptation to the world around us. But it's a tiny wafer floating in a large ocean. And
Mhm.
we need to recognize that it needs to dialogue with other aspects of that, or we'll always be at odds with ourselves. And we're living in bad faith with ourselves. So underneath this is a call to humility, but a call ultimately to step into a larger journey. And if you do so, it's not narcissism again. It's about serving something larger than you. And ultimately, that's how you become a richer person to share with your children, your partner, your co-workers, etc. This means you become a more and more honest and authentic human being for others to relate to. So let me just say, Kevin and Joe, this has been a great conversation with you. I appreciate your questions, and I appreciate the good work you're doing in opening these conversations to people. Men are so isolated. It's sad. It's pathetic. When I wrote the book on men, I got letters from all over, including the Australian outback. I don't know how books got out there, but where they said I always thought something was wrong with me. And I understand that, we've built our life around certain secrets, and we keep these secrets from each other, and we even keep them from ourselves. But until you can face the secrets in your life, then you're going to be living a kind of superficial and adaptive life, and it's not your journey. And your journey is ironically the best way you can contribute to the world. That's the paradox.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Again, we appreciate it, and we will be following all the work you do continuously. Appreciate you.
Thank you, gentlemen.